If you did miss part 1, it is on the Grimsby Public Library YouTube page, so you're welcome to go there and check it out as well at your leisure. And thank you again to the Grimsby Library for sharing this space and their amazing community. So, Ryan said, my name is Tian. Everyone calls me Tia. I'm a garden mentor. I run Gardens Key Pump Company, and I guide individuals in learning to grow and how to sort of integrate regenerative practices into their gardening. I'm also an organic vegetable farmer at Mingle Hill Farms. So I hope that you can take away even just a little bit from today's event, even if it's just some companion planting information. We will pause, like Ryan said, in the middle-ish, and just to go over. So if you have any questions, throw them in the chat and we can address them then. So we will dive right in. So in part 1, we did go over the different layers when creating a garden bed. I will talk to specifically a raised garden bed here, but a lot will be similar whether you're doing containers or if you're doing in-ground. Although for containers, your soil mixture will be a little bit different to allow for drainage. So for part 1, we went over how you can utilize cardboard, you can see on the bottom here, to suppress weeds. And then you want organic matter like straw and leaves, and well, depending on the depth of your bed as well. And if it's already created as well for the garden, I should mention, it doesn't hurt to still add in a little bit of that organic matter, especially if it was overlaying from the fall, then you can just go ahead and add right on top of that. You don't have to remove all that organic matter. Next is the soil layer. So that's usually a triple mix, an airy triple mix, I should say, that has a nice drainage. If it's already turned with like peat or even better, cocoa coir, even better because it'll allow for that nice drainage through that garden. At the top, you're going to want a few inches of compost. So compost is a decaying organic matter. So this can be plant-based, or if, for example, if you're making your own and you have your own composter that you've been adding to all season, or maybe it's animal-based in terms of an aged manure, like a sheep manure that you might get in a bag from a local nursery. So taking this concept that we went over in part 1 in terms of your layers, we're going to now upgrade our soil game a little bit. And I'm going to go over a few different options that you can add to your garden to sort of, like I said, boost it up a little bit, just for a bit more biodiversity in your soil, for the microorganisms, and for your plants. So when you are adding anything to your bed, especially these ones laid out here and going forward, you want something that's OMRI certified. So that's Organic Materials Review Institute. It's usually on the bag. EcoCert, ProCert are under that umbrella as well. So keep your eye out when you're out shopping. So once your bed is established and filled, these are the other organic materials that you can utilize. So vermicompost. So that's the first on the list here, which is worm castings, also known as worm poo. And it's also it's a black gold for a gardener. So they produce a wonderful nutrient-rich fertilizer and soil amender once they've eaten that organic matter. Adding worm castings around new seedlings or to a garden bed is fantastic. Also, when you're doing like a garden turn, such as harvesting your spring garden to make way for your cucumbers or tomatoes, worm castings are great to add to ensure you're adding nutrients back into the soil that may have been depleted by other crops earlier in the season. Next, we'll move on to alfalfa meal. So alfalfa meal really stimulates like healthy root system and stem development. So especially in young plants. So it's a good balance of NPK, which is nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So always, again, opt for an organic form that's been certified. And before planting your plants into the bed, work a small amount of alfalfa meal just into the top layer. You want to work it into the top so it doesn't blow away because it is quite finely ground. And as you water it in, it will drain through the bed as well. Next, we're going to move on to mycorrhizae, mycorrhiza, or mycorrhizal fungi. So this is a mutual relationship between fungus and plant. So the term mycorrhiza refers to the role of fungus in the plant's root system. So this powdered form, a great brand is Mike. I really love them. A lot of amazing farms use it. So it's a powdered form that you would add to the root ball of a seedling or mix with your seeds when you're sowing them so that the plants take up more nutrients and it adds additional moisture as well. So these are some amazing options. If you have any others, put it in the chat, let me know, and we can go over it. Or if there's something that you utilize that you find works as well, let me know. So while you are planting, so earlier with the alfalfa meal, mycorrhizae, all that is something that you're going to do to your bed either before you're planting or as you're putting the plant in the ground. And that's where these ones come in. So while you're planting, it's good to know what is a heavy feeder in terms of what you're actually putting into the ground. So many crops that we like to grow throughout the season are known as these heavy feeders. And this includes tomatoes, peppers, kale, broccoli, and so many more. Think of a lot of the plants that you would consider full of nutrients when you're eating them, or that need to produce a fruit, like that would flower and fruit like a tomato. So heavy feeders need a lot of mineral nutrients to survive and to even thrive. So if you're rotating your crops, like if you have multiple garden beds, crops like brassicas would ideally follow legumes like peas and beans because they add nitrogen to the soil and can replenish it before you put in those heavy feeders. Whereas if you're starting or unable to rotate due to space or you only have one garden, things like bone meal and blood meal, they're great to add to the whole once you're actually planting your seedlings. It'll allow the plant to absorb the nutrients when it needs them. So next we'll go over what NPK is. So NPK is the macronutrients for your plants that are more readily labeled on organic fertilizers and amendments. So you have N, nitrogen, P, phosphorus, K, and potassium. So blood meal is absolutely full of nitrogen, whereas bone meal is great, used to increase phosphorus to allow the plant to take up more nutrients. So on an overall umbrella, I would say your N nitrogen is great for foliage development and the growth of the plant. Phosphorus is awesome for nutrient uptake and the flowering of the plant. And potassium is wonderful for creating disease resistance in plants and establishing a nice root system. So you always want to add a bit of, say, a bone meal or a blood meal to the holes of like your tomatoes or cucumbers or peppers when they're being transplanted. That's something that we do at the farm. But also note that your NPK, that's like when you have your label and it has like a number. Those are referring to the NPK ratios. So remember that nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, they are only a sliver of the soil nutrients that they need as the plant is growing and getting healthier. Healthy soil is full of micro and macronutrients that support the microorganisms in the soil. And there's so many other nutrients to make a happy, healthy plant. So keep that in mind. Again, maybe your soil is fantastic and you don't have to add these other bone meal, blood meal amendments, but it does just help to support your plant as it continues to grow. And also remember, plants are super, super resilient. There are going to be failures and successes, but we are after creating a strong soil structure instead of catching a plant when my tomato is wilting, what do I do? Or this has this weird spot, what do I do? Whether it's a calcium deficiency or the environmental aspects, we want to create that healthy soil because healthy soil is healthy plants. So this next one is the creating of your planting plans. This is sort of the big one that you really want to focus on, especially once you are planning what seeds to order, or if you've ordered them because you know what you like and you're trying to establish where they're going to go in the garden. So I will admit that when I create a plan, I am a little bit more haphazard when I'm planting, which is, again, totally fine for anyone who's in the same boat as me. But sometimes you do need to hold the plant to understand it. That's how I work when I'm gardening, or I like to shift or move things around. And it's important to understand the size that a plant will get to know the space that it'll take up as well. And also remember, you can always take a plant out. It's not a big deal. You can transplant it if needed. It doesn't love it, but there's always that option if something doesn't work for you. So, how I plan. What you see in front of you here is this drawing is something that I literally whipped up for my parents' garden, which is pictured here on the right, in April, about April 20th of last year. And as you can see, the dimensions were just something that my mom had thought of that she would like for space. So I went through and I designed a mulch pathway. We wanted to make sure it was enclosed because we do see a lot of squirrels, rabbits, and we do have a dog in the yard often. So we wanted to make sure that nothing would be getting into the space. And as you can see here, I just did also a quick little dimensional drawing so I could visualize a bit more of what it's going to be like. I will say that in the future, or what I wish we would have done, is built up the sides of the bed even another 6 inches, just so we had a bit more depth, as there is a little bit more clay in this location of our yard. So we only have about 6 to 8 inches of healthy soil that we have amended and created. It is beautiful and it works for us, and it will continue to develop over time, but that's something that we definitely would have considered. Also, for this growing space here, if you can see my blue cursor at the top, this mulch pathway, I probably would have cut this in about another foot, so that instead of it being 3 feet at this dimension, it was only 2, only because the back side is closed in, whether it's the chicken wire or trellises and tomatoes, all bushy, and we can't reach across the garden to harvest from both sides. Reaching across 3 feet from this side can be a little bit difficult. So even 2.5 to 2 feet there really would have helped how we maneuvered through our garden. So that's something that's very important to consider when creating your planting plan. You don't want to put, say, tall things in the front here, first for sun exposure, but also you don't want to have to be reaching so far through to the other side, especially if you have like radish on this side and it's really hard to reach over this chicken wire fence all the time, because this chicken wire is about 2.5 feet tall. So it was a little bit something that we would have considered a little bit differently now that the structure is actually there. Since then, we have enclosed it and we've created 2 other garden beds, but something to consider. Now, for the actual plan itself, as you can see, my family absolutely loves radishes. We use them in salad, for cooking, in drinks. But this is a lot of space allotted for radish. And it was something that in this quick sketch, it was a little bit overwhelming. So if you can tell in this photo here, along the back here, we have tomatoes and they curve around the corner a little bit. And then in this section right below this flamingo is cucumbers. So later in the season, we did have a taller trellis right above the cucumbers, and we put some taller bamboo stakes, taller than these ones, behind the tomatoes. This is north and south is at the gate here. So we want to have our taller items at the back, again, because they're north. So we wanted to make sure we wouldn't shade out anything that's in the front here. And then we had things like arugula, which is this little green patch, and our lettuce at a nice convenient location. Arugula is constantly cut and harvested to regrow. So we want to make sure it was more accessible for us rather than having it further away to reach. It's something that was nice and quick. Also, the kale being here, it was definitely nice, but it got a lot bigger than we anticipated. It was insanely tall. The leaves were like the size of my torso. So I think in the future, we would have probably changed it to be closer to the back, just so that we were considering the height difference and then utilizing the shade of the kale for maybe the arugula that was planted here as well. So moving on to another method that I'm going to show you. So for this one, a fellow gardener mentor showed me this form of creating a planting plan a while back, and I have to give her so much credit for this amazing discovery. It makes it easy to rearrange as you're trying to plan, and especially if you're just getting started and not really sure how things grow. So thank you to Melissa from the Good Seed for showing this. So what you will need for this is you're going to need some different colored sticky notes. I like to use a pencil just so that I'm not wasting too many sticky notes. I can just erase. Just a ruler. You'll want to have a piece of graph paper with the dimensions drawn out of your garden on it. So for this purpose, I'm going to do an 8x3 bed. That's traditionally what Gardens Keep Co designs and builds for clients as well. Here I have some matching highlighters. So in the future, if I felt comfortable with my drawing, I could remove these sticky notes and color them with highlighters just so it's a bit more permanent. So I'm not worried about the sticky notes falling off. And then have some reference materials and books there. So here we go. This is going to be our sticky note planting plan. So what I have it here in my hand on the screen, but it's really tiny. So I did take a photo, but what's great is you can literally peel these off and change them wherever you want to put them, just depending on things that you're learning as you go through those reference books, or if you want to change out what you're growing. So the first thing you're going to do, like I said, is draw your garden to scale, whether it's a dot or graph paper. And then you're going to identify north, east, south, and west. So I should have put it up here for you, but where the tomatoes are is north, and where the radish are is the south. So here I used all these different crops. Again, you may have done one for spring and had things like cold hardy greens and spinach. So the crops, again, like I said here, are tomatoes and cukes. So this would be great for now, like an end of May, early June planting, once the fear of frost has passed. And then you can transplant in your tomatoes and cucumbers. So this is a great thing if you're new and you're not sure how to plant. You can definitely steal this here. And you may already have the cold hardy greens if you've been gardening for a bit. Maybe you have your kale in, you've got some lettuce and spinach going already. So this is so you can sort of plant around it as well. This here would be something where if you already have a spring garden going, you can easily add some worm compost around, or worm castings, I should say, around this bed, just to refresh the soil. Say you've taken out a lot of peas, or you had something that overwintered here last season. It's nice to throw in some of that, those worm castings, just to replenish the nutrients in the soil there. So when creating your planting plan, work seasonally. So if this were a month ago and I was creating this plan, like I said, I would have peas where the cukes are, because those would want to be trellised. And if it's mid-August and I wanted to maybe extend my growing season through to December or January, which you can absolutely do if you use cloths or you create a greenhouse or whatever it may be. So yeah, if you're going to be having a fall garden, maybe you want to put in some kales, a bit more chard, greens, and maybe you want to consider space somewhere in your yard for where you're going to plant your garlic. So going over this is we have got our trellis is in pink. So tomatoes and cukes will be trellised there. And you always want to make sure you know where your trellises are going, especially when it's just quick like this offhand. You can take a quick glance and see where the trellises are, because you don't want to trellis, say, right at the front here, and that's going to shade out everything in the back. The items I have in orange are all season. So kale, that's something that I may have planted a few weeks ago, and by now it would be a nice decent size, and it's going to continue to grow all season, and maybe you'll even overwinter it. So this will live here for most of the year, unless you decide to take it out and just harvest the whole thing and make some chips. So the yellow here, which I have for lettuce and spinach, those are items that I may have transplanted as seedlings through April or around now, and then maybe I'll direct seed them again now and through May and through June, because you want to have constant harvests of these. They may start to not do so well when you get into July or August, But by mid to end of August, you're going to want to put in your succession of lettuce and spinach for when you want your fall garden. In green here, we have direct sown items. So that's beets and carrots. Of course, those are things that you're going to want to have multiples of through the season, but usually they do take a little bit longer, approximately 70 days to fully mature, although you can have baby carrots and baby beets, or if you want the greens of your beets, you can do that. So they will live in the ground significantly longer than, say, something like turnip or radish. So these are here, and they're on the sides of the bed because they're easy to harvest, similar with your spinach and your head lettuce. It's near the edge, it's easy to reach. The kale, you're not going to be taking a bunch of leaves off all the time, something like you would maybe a lettuce or spinach. Usually you'll do one larger harvest and deal with those greens as they come, whether it's freezing them, dehydrating them, or putting them into a stew. Moving on to blue is our succession plants. So these are plants that have like a fast turnover. So they're right at the front of the bed for nice quick access. And they're something that you would plant maybe every 10 to 14 days or less if you want to have more, like a faster harvest. So for turnip and radish, I would maybe plant, depends on how much you like to eat of them, but I'd probably do 10 turnip, 10 radish, just in single rows, about a foot or two apart. And then in another 10 to 14 days, I'd put turnip and radish probably turnip about 3 inches away from the last seeding, radish probably about 3 inches again away from the last seeding. And I continue to keep rows. And then when this back row is ready and full, then in another 2 weeks, you can harvest that middle row, but you've already succession planted that first row. So it really works with you as you sort of have constant rows going for that succession planting. Moving on to the purple, which is companions. So this is one of my favorite things to include into a garden, not only because they're practical and they're good for pest management, but because they also bring so much beauty. Not to say that kale leaves aren't stunning or tomatoes, because my goodness, they're stunning. But they can have so much dual purpose and they add a bit more structure as well. So marigold plants can get quite large. They're things that you would want to, once they're established, maybe 6 inches to 10 inches tall, you'd pinch them back by cutting at a node, and then it'll turn into this big bush of marigolds. Dill, which is an umbilifier, so it has that sort of sprawled open top once it's grown. It really invites a lot of like beneficial insects, which will help to pollinate your cucumbers, but it'll also deter other pests as well. Nasturtium is just beautiful. You can get some nasturtium seeds. Everything here is relatively easy to get a hold of at nurseries or at seed or seedling companies, especially at your local farms now. Most farms are doing their seedling sales either now or by the last week of May. Mingle Hill Farms is 13th to the 15th. So you can check those out at minglehill.com. And we do have the nasturtium for sale there as well. And then the chamomile here, I would recommend the German chamomile. You can start seeds now and the plant will go nuts. It self-seeds quite prolifically. So if you don't want a bunch of chamomile all around your garden bed, I definitely make sure to deadhead often. The Roman chamomile, which is a perennial, which is still fantastic. It's just better for things like product making, whereas the German chamomile has just a better taste if you want to be making teas or something. So this is the planting plan that you can sort of put together just with sticky notes. You can easily switch around, change it as you go, or you can be a bit more haphazard and do a quick drawing like I might, but be sure to always reference your books or websites, especially like West Coast Seeds is a fantastic Canadian-based company out in BC, and they have a lot of information about spacing for plants, the size of plant we'll get to, because that'll really determine how many of each plant you're going to put in. So something to consider when you're planting, rather than putting in like 1,000 radish seed. They need a little bit of space. So for radish, you might thin them out, which means you're gonna let them sprout and then pull them so they have space to grow. All right, so before questions, I want to quickly remind everyone that when they're gardening, take your notes, document literally everything. It doesn't matter how you do it at all. So what's here is this one is actually what I'm using this year. It's just a little moleskin journal. It's great when there's dates already available in your journals, but they don't have to. Maybe you write them in yourself. But it just allows you to see things that happened that year. So for example, you can see here that I had a bunch of seeding done on these days, and I prepped the garden on that day. I write in pencil when it's my plan, and I write in pen when it's something that I've accomplished. The highlighter is usually, depending, I use yellow for when I'm seeding and I use green when I'm planting out. But that'll be all up to you as well. I always include a legend in my journals, just so it's easier to look through instead of having to write everything out or remember it, because year after year you think you're going to remember it and you might not. This one here, the Gardener's Journal, this is something so beautiful that I was gifted. It's by Lee Valley, and so a 10-year chronicle. So that means on the inside, it has multiple pages and multiple lines for every year. So but I will say it's like an encyclopedia. So it is thick, it's beefy, and it's not something that I bring out to the garden with me, first because it's precious and beautiful, but also it's a little bit not as practical to be bringing out. It's something that over the years I'll draw on my planting plans in year 1, and in year 5 I can look back and see what I did. It's also great for crop rotation to know what you did, because there's space for drawings. And if you can see in my little square, this is an example of what a page looks like. So it literally has March 2nd right there, and then 10 spaces for those 10 years. And what's great about it is, and like any gardening journal, not just this one, write things in it that aren't just pertaining to your vegetable garden. Maybe you write down that your sister had a baby, or maybe in mine as well, I have that, and I've written down like the forsythia bloomed today, or I wrote down the other day that the forsythia is dropping its blooms, or the trout lily came out. Just things that over time you sort of get used to seeing in nature, because it also allows you to watch nature, to consider it. You get a bit more involved with it. And maybe one year you had some robins nesting in the tree in front of your house, or in the shrub in the corner, and then a few years later they moved location, or they left. It's just kind of nice to track those things, especially as you get into this gardening game. It's nice to sort of see as you continue to grow. So we'll take a quick pause here if there are any questions. Ryan, did you want to quickly read out any questions at all, if there are any? If not, we can definitely keep going into some plants.
No questions yet, Tia, but let's give people a few seconds in case they, and of course people can also unmute themselves to ask a question. That might be easier.
Yeah, that'd be fantastic.
But nothing in the chat quite yet.
Yeah, no problem. And we can, if more come in, just unvideo yourself and we can address them as well.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Tia.
Awesome. All right, well then let's, again, you can pop those questions in the chat if you have them, or if I'm missing anything, or there's something you want me to go over, I'm happy to. If you have questions about the farm or Gardens Keep, I'm here. So let's move on to some plant notes. So I'm just going to sort of talk about some of the popular plants, or a lot that I grow. If you have any questions, again, ask. But it's going to be a lot of information, so I'm just going to breeze through it and stop me if you need me to. So tomatoes, there are determinate and indeterminate tomatoes. So I'll let you know the difference. So determinate are more of a bushy variety, and when they reach a certain maturity, the tomatoes will color, and that's what you get. Those are mostly ones that you would get at like a plant nursery or a grocery store. They're also usually referred to as patio tomatoes. Those are the ones that you would just throw on the patio, they'll color, you pop them off, and then what you have is what you have. So I will say with determinate tomatoes, There is a conception that if your tomato plant is flowering either before the season is warm or if it's before it's in the ground, that you would pull your tomato flowers off, which you can do if you have an indeterminate plant, because it will continue to put out flowers. But for a determinate tomato plant, leave the flowers, because the flowers it's putting out, that's it. It won't continue to produce more flowers. So just check on what kind of tomato plant you have. So indeterminate tomatoes, these are a vining variety. So I would say in farming, definitely more only usually what we grow. And again, determinate, a bit more prominent with gardeners, but it's nice to have a mix of both for sure. So again, indeterminate is a vining variety, and it will continue to grow and put out fruit all season long. We plant our tomatoes at the farm. We did that on April 12th this year. And then usually by July, we're harvesting and we top our tomatoes, which means we cut off the head, the top of our tomatoes, usually around early September, second week of September. And when we cut off the top of our tomato plants, that means that all of the fruit on the vine below will start to color. And we cut it off that early only because we don't heat our our early season greenhouse into winter. So if we cut it off in September, the tomatoes will still have about 3 or more weeks before it starts getting cold to color up. So if you have tomatoes in your yard, I recommend doing something similar, especially if they are outside and they need that time. Similarly, they will color in a windowsill, but you can sort of do with what you will. I will say indeterminate does have to be trellised because it is vining and will continue to grow. So you can clip it up, string it up. However, what will work for you, whether it's determinate or indeterminate, and when you have space for all of them, harvest the fruit when it's fully colored because it's just in your yard and you want to bring it and eat it right away.
Hi, Tia. That's a really cool tip about tomatoes. I've got to try that.
Awesome.
And
Yeah.
I'm just coming on here just because there's a question from Linda, so I'll read it
Sure.
out to you. It says, "Hello, Tian. I live in an area that is mostly clay. I have put in a large raised bed, but if I wanted to plant directly in the ground, how far down should I dig to add better soil? Thanks."
So Linda, right?
Yes.
I will say that working in clay is still totally plausible because clay holds a lot of nutrients in the soil. I'd say if you're working in sand, it would be more difficult because your nutrients would be depleted faster, often, and you'd have to water all the time. But with clay, it is going to hold that moisture. Depends on the space that you're putting in the ground, Linda, because even if you just have a space that is, say, like 2 by 4, you're going to want to dig down at least a foot. I mean, you can do 6 inches, but that also means that you have to add a lot of sand, some loam and that kind of thing, because it's really hard to change your soil structure without a larger cost. I would say raised bed is definitely the way to go, or maybe grow bags. If you're, I do understand it's so nice to plant in the ground, but I would also recommend maybe just giving it a go. I would put maybe some cardboard down on the ground. And then right on top of that, you can put a border on, or you can just put some compost on top of that. Let it sit for a little bit, water it, and then just dig and put your, whatever it is, tomatoes, cucumbers, in the ground and see if it works. It might be fantastic with nutrients and a few amendments. But again, better to be working in clay for sure. Less watering can be really nice. But raised beds, I would say, are definitely the way to go. And it sounds like you're already on your way there, but I think you can do it. Try with the clay. So moving on to the next one is we have peppers. So for peppers, so I'm going to mainly talk about sweet bell peppers here. But I can go over hot peppers as well. So bell peppers take a large portion of the season to provide you with the harvest. And that doesn't mean like I'm not, definitely grow them. They're glorious. That time that it takes to grow them only makes them taste better when you pick them from your own garden. So green peppers are just unripe colored peppers. So, and they can take up to 60 days from transplant to become a full deep green pepper for you to eat. And a red pepper can take up to 80 days. So that's almost an extra month that you're waiting for that red pepper to color up. So definitely leave some of your green peppers. And again, a plant will put off multiple peppers. Maybe you just decide to leave a few of your green peppers to color up because maybe you love green peppers as well. But yeah, so you can also pick a green pepper once it's starting to show a little bit of color. It usually looks more like a purple darkness around a pepper. That means it's starting to color. You can put it in a windowsill and it'll probably color within a few days for you too, similar to your tomato. It does just mean when you're putting something in a windowsill or when you've pulled it off the plant before it's actually fully ripe, it can be a little bit more starchy, or it won't have the same amount of like nice moisture water content with the fully developed flavor. Again, it'll be a little bit more starchy, maybe not have more of a grocery store quality taste than fresh from the garden taste, I will say. Okay, so moving on to head lettuce. So head lettuce, by that I mean literally what get from any store. So at the start of a season, I recommend transplanting your head lettuce. So otherwise you can definitely sow your lettuce seeds about 1/4 inch deep into the garden bed and then cover them just to protect the seedlings as they start to grow, especially if it's early season. So I will say that you want to always water in these seeds and not just lettuce seeds. So when you water in, you want to make sure the soil stays damp as that seed begins to germinate. Because like we say at the farm, a dry seed is a dead seed. So you always want to make sure that all seeds stay damp as they're germinating. You may want to thin out these seedlings as they appear, because maybe you sprinkled in like 10 lettuce seeds, because a pack of lettuce seeds, they usually give you like 100. And you might not eat 100 heads of lettuce in a season. So thinning them out just means that you're sort of pulling out the ones that you're not going to use as they germinate because they might be a little too close. So lettuce likes at least 6 inches of growing room. You can definitely do more, but you don't want to lose any space. You want to have some intensive planting as well. So I would sow lettuce seeds about every 10-ish days to keep a constant harvest, but it will depend on how much you're using or if you're going to supply for your neighbor or other family members too. So when you're harvesting from the garden for head lettuce, there are 2 options. I'm sure there's different ways to do all of these, but I'll go over the 2. So the first one is just to simply cut the entire head of lettuce and wash it out in the sink and use it in the kitchen. Ideally, you're growing organically, but we still recommend washing everything only because, I mean, in lettuce, you never know, you're going to find ladybugs, slugs, all that extra protein. So always give it a wash. And then the second option, which I've utilized quite a few times, and the structure of your lettuce does change quite a bit, is you pull the outside leaves. So when you have your head, I should have brought a head of lettuce with me. When you have a head of lettuce, you pull off the outer leaves and you harvest those as you need them. So that's kind of nice, especially if there's not 7 people in your family or even 4. If it's just 1 or 2, it's kind of nice when you only want a small side salad. You can just pull off the leaves that you need on the outside and keep the crown of the head intact. The crown of the head is the center in the middle where all the growth is starting and coming from. So what you can do is as you pull out those outer leaves, you will notice that it looks like your plant is bolting, which means it's growing to put off seed, which in a sense it is, but it's also getting taller because that crown and that stem is continuing to grow. So sometimes you can have plants in your garden that are like 3 feet tall, but you can always cut them down before that point if you don't want them. You can always let them go to seed as well, because lettuce seeds, you just put like a mesh cloth over the top and cinch it closed, or a paper bag, and then you can save the seeds. You put that cloth or bag over top because if it's open pollinated, you want to make sure it's not going to cross with anything as well. All right, so arugula. So arugula is similar to leaf lettuce in the way it grows. So with arugula, leaf lettuce, a mesclun mix, that's something where you cut it and then it grows again. You cut it and it grows again. Usually you can get 3 really powerful cuttings. Sometimes they start to slow down in their growth, especially as the heat comes, or the more that you cut, or they can get a little bit like hard to eat. But this is why we have succession planting, because you're going to plant a little bit, and then about 10 days later, you're going to plant some more, all that kind of stuff. So it's grown in tight rows that you can cut with scissors and allowed to regrow up to 3 times. Arugula is a great addition to salads, sandwiches, and more, especially because it has that peppery taste. The peppery taste can get even stronger the longer it's in the garden, or depending on the variety that you have. So keep multiple seed packets of arugula around, or your leaf lettuce, because as you start it earlier in the season, it's a great one that can stay in the garden through until July, depending on how often you're seeding it. And it's amazing to reseed in late August for a constant fall harvest, because it is quite hardy through our winters as well. So in our garden here, we planted it early season. We kept it all year. It was an absolute favorite. And we kept it protected from bugs just with a little bit of like frost cloth. So it's just like a thin piece of mesh that the sun could still get through. And we were harvesting it until about mid-January, when the weather really took a turn and got down to like, I don't know, minus like 17 to 20 at night or something. But it will continue to last if you have it covered. But we also had a mini heater that we put in our greenhouse. So it'll depend on what you can utilize, but even like a poly tarp over top that allows light through can work too, to create a mini greenhouse for you. Okay, so radish and turnip. So I'm putting these in the same group just because they are amazing early spring crops, and they're really crisp vegetables, and they'll last in the fridge forever, especially if you put them into water or cut them up and put them in that water right away. So you can direct seed both of these into the garden every once in a while, and thin them as they're needed. So like I said, you can sprinkle them, like maybe put 2 seeds per hole, or you just seed them in a row. And then, like I said, they usually want about 3 inches of growing space. But if you're going to want baby radish, it doesn't hurt to plant them even tighter together. It's really your personal preference, because they want to grow. So they'll even start to like bulb out and grow on one another too. So once then you thin them, like I said, just to give them a bit more space to grow. And what you can also do with these, which sometimes they take, sometimes they don't, is once you've pulled out that plant to thin it, you can even try just replanting that one that you pulled out to see if it comes back, especially if you're running low on seed, or like now when seeds are a bit more scarce and harder to get a hold of, especially if you order a specialty variety and you don't want to lose out on those few radishes that you're pulling. So you can always try and transplant them, but make sure to always water it in after you do that. Plant a small section, leave space for succession, just like we showed in the sticky note planting plan, and plant about every 10 days or so. Again, closer if you want more. And these mature in between 30 and 45 days. So they're a fast season crop. So you're going to get them quite often. So that's why they're so great to plant in early spring. So we planted ours here about 3 weeks ago, but because all these cold nights, the seedlings are just popping up. So we could have planted them probably a few days ago, but I was a little too eager. So in just a few days, we'll probably seed a few more just for the next succession as well. All right, moving on to some herbs. So these can be anything that you prefer to use in your home. Again, it's all up to personal preference here, with flowers or with herbs, vegetables, anything, right? So basil, rosemary, sage, thyme, lavender, oregano, mint, they're all in the same growing family, and they're great planted together. So keep mint in a pot, as it tends to spread out over other crops. So I'm sure you could have had an experience with this where your mint went absolutely crazy, or the roots were absolutely insane and really hard to manage because they spread like a rhizome. They spread underground, just pop up everywhere. So usually keep mint, spearmint, all that to, or even like lemon balm, to its own pot. Chives and green onions will thrive near like beans and Swiss chard. Parsley is happy next to tomatoes. And if left to bloom, it will attract hoverflies and predatory wasps as well, which are all beneficial. And they can be planted from seed, but you may decide to transplant organic plants, especially if you're planting into May and you haven't had a head start, especially if it's like an allium. in the onion family. So moving on to cucumbers. So cucumbers are one of my, have a love-hate relationship with cucumbers. The texture of the leaves always gets me because they're a little bit like rough, like sandpaper grainy, but they just taste so good. So with cucumbers, always trellis your cucumbers. First, because cucumbers can be really susceptible to a bunch of different like pests, insects, fungus from the soil, downy mildew. So trellising is really going to help the success of your cucumbers. So what we did this year is we took bamboo and we weaved it through chicken wire, just because at the time we didn't have any more access to wood, as it was a bit harder to get midway through last year. So you can try that out, or you can, again, use wood, make a frame, put your chicken wire on it, or maybe you have more of like a garden mesh, and then it can just be anchored into the garden so that your cucumbers can climb it. Peas and pole beans can be trellised in a similar way. You can also maybe build like a simple A-frame and put a hook at the top and a string connected to like a stake in the ground, and then you can clip your cucumber or pea or tomato up through the center of that frame as well. So there's so many different ways to trellis, but you can always purchase one to fit your space if that's what you prefer as well. So cucumbers need airflow desperately. So what we like to do is in the bottom, I'd say at least the bottom foot, depending, once the plant starts growing, bottom foot to 2 feet, take off those bottom leaves, use a clean pair of clippers. Always make sure your clippers or gardening tools are sanitized between different plants, just so you don't transfer any bacteria. So make sure you take off those bottom leaves on those taller fruits, especially once they start developing more and getting their cute little baby cukes growing. So cucumber beetles, squash bugs, once they start to arrive, they're best handled by removing by hand, I've found, and putting them into a bucket of soapy water. Also, we have used like a duster buster at the farm to vacuum them up before. It seems a bit more rough, but it really helped to control that population in an organic way as a pest management. And the soapy water, you just sort of swish it around and they should be fine in there too. Similar with like slugs or hornworms as well. You can put them into soapy water, or if you have the heart, you can snip them. So let's move on to zucchini. Oopsies, sorry guys. Oh no, here we go. Zucchini. So growing flowers nearby is really going to help with the pollination of zucchini, mainly because if the flower is not pollinated, it's going to have a really hard time succeeding. So things like tomatoes, you would shake them and that'll help pollination. Cucumbers, if they're outside, they're generally, I've never had issues with pollination, but if you do, again, plant some flowers or companion plants near them. Some cucumbers are parthenocarpic, which just means that they are self-pollinating. So look for that on a packet if you're, or a seed company site. But for zucchinis, you may need to hand pollinate, which can be a lot of fun and a big learning experience. So to pollinate a zucchini is remove a male flower. So just go right to the base of the plant and snip the stem of a male flower. You'll know it's a male flower because it's literally just, there's no fruit at the base and there's a flower. So you snip it, take that, and then I remove all of the petals, just so it gives you more of an easier access with that. And then I remove all of those petals, and then you take the stamen, which is the part covered in the pollen, and you rub it on the female flower stigma. So the flower stigma, it has a bit more of like a mouth shape to it, and you're literally going to rub the stamen on the stigma. So you're pollinating for them. And you'll know it's a female plant, or sorry, I should say fruit, because it literally has the fruit on it. So male and female flowers grow on one plant. So you're not like looking for different plants. It's all in the one plant. And anyway, so you're going to hand pollinate. And again, you'll see a little fruit and then a flower on a female plant. So female carries the fruit, if that makes sense. So this will ensure the pollination of your fruit production. I've seen people use paintbrushes to just brush it all around, but I like to just take the flower itself. And you can use multiple flowers for multiple female flowers. You don't have to change it to everyone, because sometimes you won't have as many male flowers open when female flowers are open. Zucchini is also prone to powdery mildew, similar to your cucumber. So all cucurbits, like your squashes and all that too, can get this. And it's really hard to avoid. So the best way to sort of just get ahead of that is to remove those bottom leaves, remove any discolored leaves that are showing. If you see a fruit is starting to rot or it hasn't been pollinated properly, either you didn't get to it, or maybe it just, you didn't see it, or sometimes it just doesn't always take. Then with that, you're going to want to make sure that you can get her pollinated. Just so that you don't want any pests to show up on your zucchini. I will say that zucchini, when you're harvesting, is best at approximately 8 inches long for best flavor. But that's up to you. Maybe some people like to let them get as big as their arm, because one day you'll see it and it'll be perfect. You'll say, I get it tomorrow. And then you go there and it's absolutely massive. The bigger it is, the less of a flavor it tends to have, which that can still be great, because maybe you want to use it in your baking for a zucchini banana bread or something like that. Okay, so calendula and marigold. So these ones are some of my favorite companion plants. So they repel bad nematodes in the soil, and they also draw in pollinators for your fruiting crops or your flowering crops as well. So the more you prune these flowers, calendula and marigold, the more they'll produce. So similar to that, that pinching or deadheading method. So when you're cutting these back, when you go to cut them, find where the stem intersects with a node and cut off that spent flower to allow the other ones to continue to grow. So both of these do self-seed. So I will say they are relatively easy to pull from the ground. They're a nice size plant. They're not like a chamomile where they pop up kind of wispy. Calendula and marigold are relatively easy to control if they self-seed, but if you don't want them to, just make sure you pop those heads off before they seed in the fall. And they both also have medicinal properties that can be used for products or dye making. I think I mentioned it in part 1, but calendula is great. We've used it we take the petals, let them dry. We put them in some oil of your choice, sunflower, olive, let it sit in a window for a few weeks. And it's really great for skincare. Okay, now on to the next slide. So companion plants. So this one, again, is, I was mentioning to Ryan at the start, before everyone popped on, that we're doing a bunch of companion plant trials here at my home this year, because it's nice to see how plants interact, because there's so many things that can show up, and maybe it works for you, and so much depends on where you live, your climate, certain varieties of plants, if it's native to your region. That'll all depend on your companion plants. But the list I've compiled here as well are the sort of general rules for a few different plants. So I will quickly go over what the different types of companion planting are, because there are many benefits to companion planting. And some of them are as listed here. So minimizing risk. So companion planting increases the odds of higher yields. And even if one crop fails or is affected by weather, or pests or disease, it also doesn't mean that all of them will, because the companion plant is there as well. So crop protection, it can offer more of a delicate plant shelter for your plants from weather, wind, sun, or growing beside another plant, because it helps to create a shield and protection. So for example, I like to put kale up, and if I'm putting maybe radish or something below it, just so I don't get any burn on my radish in the season. It's still bright and sunny out, but it's not going to be as affected as if the radish was just sort of sitting out. Trap cropping. So this is probably one of the bigger ones that we do most often, especially at the farm. So this companion planting is the ultimate pest management system. Some plants help to repel unwanted pests, while others can be used to lure pests away from the garden or the farm. And this is referred to as trap cropping. So positive hosting. So this is planting in proximity to plants which produce like a surplus of nectar, pollen, to increase the population of beneficial insects that will manage all of those harmful pests. So this is something that we definitely do as well by planting a lot of flowers in the location too. So things to plant. Oh my goodness, I just realized we're running on time. Let's fly. Things to plant. So tomatoes, plant basil to sweeten it, plant marigold as that trap crop to help bring in pollinators. The marigold will repel whitefly, Mexican beetle, root knot nematodes. At the same time, they'll attract hoverflies as well, and parasitoid wasps. Plant lettuce near brassicas, cucumbers, and onions because they're such light feeders. They won't affect the growth of these plants. Plant nasturtiums. They make a good trap crop for aphids, which can be a big problem throughout the year, and they deter whiteflies, cucumber beetles, squash beetles, Colorado potato beetles. So we always put a nice chunk of nasturtium near our cucumbers. And it's also a good companion plant for brassicas, cucumbers, melons, radishes, and tomatoes. Sage repels both the cabbage moth and the carriage rust fly. So cabbage moth is that white little fly that lands and puts so many of those horrible worms all over your kale, your cauliflower, your broccoli. So definitely plant some sage because it is such a scent, like an aromatic herb. So don't plant it near cucumber though, because it's quite sensitive to the scent, but they're overall great companion plant in the garden. And dill improves the health of cabbages and other brassicas and is a good companion plant for corn, cucumbers, lettuce, and onions. And it attracts ladybugs, parasitoid wasps, hoverflies, bees, garden spiders. And it's one of the most useful companion plants, also because it doesn't take up a lot of space. It's quite wispy. It doesn't block out light. So there's a lot of great stuff there too. Okay, so flowers for the garden. This one is, again, one of my favorites, things we're trying to add a lot to the farm, not only for beauty, but for the bees. We just had some bees added to the farm. They're great for the garden because you can use a lot of these as cut flowers, which I highly recommend because they just bring so much beauty. You can bring the garden literally inside to look at instead of just eating it. So consider the benefit when you're planting your flowers. Maybe it's just as a cut flower for the table, but maybe it's also for the pollinators to increase the biodiversity of ones that will come around to your home. So a nice portion should hopefully be some native plants, even if they're even perennials, but there's also ones that they can withstand more of our fluctuating weather, but it's really up to you and personal preference because just like herbs and vegetables, flowers are going to be more specific to every person. I will say definitely try to include all annuals, biennials, and perennials, just so all the insects are getting sort of a different mix of things and they can rely on things to show up. And always grow things in larger clumps instead of one flower here and one there. Plant a few in certain areas so that the bees and the birds can see the different patterns. So space, it may be an issue for your plants, but you can always just add more containers, or a lot of flowers can just go right into the ground as well. They're very resilient. For a longer vase life, I recommend doing some sunflowers and zinnias. They're ideal and they keep their color and shape for a very long time. For drying, if you plan to dry in the season, like hanging upside down to dry and keep through the winter, try strawflower, gomphrena, and lavender. For the bees, wild bergamot, yarrow, and cosmos are amazing. There was a sleeping bee in a cosmos last year, and it was a very wholesome moment. Some favorites of mine are the cut and come again flowers. So this includes zinnia, cosmos, strawflower, so many more. These are my favorite because they have a decent vase life, and when farming or gardening, if it is a lot of work, or maybe you're putting all your energy into flowers, I'm not sure, but if your main focus is on the vegetables, it's nice to have sort of a not putting as much time into the flowers. All you have to do is make sure you're deadheading or cut them for your house so that more can continue to grow. Also, you don't have to plant as much. So if you cut a flower, more will come. You don't have to plant something else after you've taken that flower. Okay, so we've got zinnias, we've got cosmos, lavender. All these seeds are readily available. Lavender plants, definitely easy to get your hands on. Make sure to plant some that are strong for our Canadian winters here. Things like Spanish lavender, they actually won't continue to make it through our winters. Sometimes they will, but they won't thrive. You want like a lavandula angustifolia, an English lavender, or an intermedia mix, one that's going to make it through our seasons. So here we have lemon bergamot, but wild bergamot is probably the way to go, but you can do either. So it's great to make some teas. Echinacea, absolutely fantastic, perennial. It's very sturdy. And yarrow, this is Western yarrow, so it's white, but there's different kinds for sure. It just looks like a beautiful, beautiful little cloud as well. And it does spread quite a bit though. So definitely make sure to check out the growth patterns of any of your plants when you're going. Maybe you want to do something more like dahlias, ranunculus, tulips, snapdragons. There's so many different things that you can plant. Again, just check. Floret Flower has an amazing blog for details on how to grow all of those things, especially spacing or timing. But yeah, I definitely recommend putting in some native plants to go along with your cut flowers if you plan on doing both. So we'll move into native plants, which is sort of our last piece. So for native plants, there are so many that are actually from around here, which is very fantastic. All these things that I've taken here are from David Suzuki's Butterfly Project, and this one's based in Toronto. But a lot of them very similarly relate to our region just across the lake as well. So on here you have things, these are all summer flowering. In part one, we went over ones that are great for the spring. And in part one, there was only about one that was great as a butterfly host plant. As we get into the summer flowering native plants, there's a bunch. So definitely make sure to include at least one or two butterfly host plants in your garden, just to really support the scarce monarch butterfly populations or populations in general. So I will say milkweed is a fantastic option for your butterflies. Your type of milkweed will depend on the sort of soil and location that you are, whether it's swamp milkweed, common milkweed, butterfly milkweed. So looking at this, anise hyssop, that is an amazing pollinator plant. I highly recommend it. You'll notice this is summer blooming, so a lot of these require some full sun, although you can get away with a little bit of shade. The great blue lobelia is quite stunning, and it really trails. The Minardi here, that is the wild bergamot. So that's one, and it's absolutely stunning as it continues to grow. That's like a cut and come again one as well. The bees were absolutely all over it last year. So you can't go wrong with those ones. And then quick little one on page 2 is we have got some Candida anemone. This one does spread quite a bit, so it will depend on the space that you're working in. Nodding onion, it is insanely beautiful, but even though it's named, it is not edible. So make sure to check into those things before ever eating any plants, even if they're native. And I'm sure you know of Black-eyed Susan or Rudbeckia. That's the beautiful one. Just it can spread quite prolifically, but it does keep a show on for most of the summer. So I highly recommend giving that one a go as well for your native plants. There are a lot of different options in terms of native plants. It's not just, there are some here I'm sure that you recognize, but there are so many more. There's different resources if you're interested. So that might include the Halton Master Gardeners website. They're located in Hamilton. And then, or Halton, I should say, the Hamilton Pollinator Paradise Project is located in Hamilton. They have a beautiful website. And then the Ontario Native Plant, that's also a nursery, but they have some amazing resources, and they have a sale going on right now. And Mingle Hill is also selling a few native plants. We have some echinacea, some yarrow. We are doing Roman chamomile, so it's great for pollinators and it's perennial. So yeah, definitely something to check out, to look into. Again, this will be available on, or should be available on YouTube. So if you need any of these names, it's also available on the Halton Master Gardeners page, but these are the ones I've pulled that are hopefully within driving distance to everyone present. However, if you're coming to us from somewhere else, maybe like Montreal, there are definitely different places that you can hunt down, locate. Native plants are definitely easy to get a hold of. It's just doing that Google search. So thank you so much. For more information, I can be found at all of these sources here, whether it's through email, Instagram, website, or through the farm, or my personal contact on Instagram there as well. So thank you again to the Grimsby Library. Absolutely fantastic to join again this year, and for the wonderful community that you guys put on. So thank you.
Thank you for being here to do this presentation, Tia.
Thank you, Ryan.
A couple questions came in while you were talking a little
Awesome.
while ago. So maybe I'll read them to you.
Sure.
Both from Beth. I'll just read the first one first. When vertical gardening, how closely can we plant them together?
Awesome. So it will depend on what you're planting. So say you're planting tomatoes. If you're just having like one wall of tomatoes, you can go anywhere from 14 to 18 inches apart in terms of closeness, because you also want to make sure that you're not getting too tied up in your other branches that are coming off there as well. And there's enough room for the fruit to continue to grow, which those will be your indeterminate tomatoes. For things like cucumbers, you can go, I'd say 10 inches is close, but we usually stick to about 18 for that too. It'll depend on how fast you're harvesting, how many bottom leaves you're taking off. Yeah, we kept them relatively close. We had 3 plants within about 1.5 feet in my garden this year, and everything worked out really beautifully.
And second question from Beth is, when gardening in a backyard, should we worry about rotating plants? I've always had my tomatoes in the same spot, but last year they were not as successful.
Yeah, so that can definitely be a thing. I mean, it will depend on the health of your soil, because if you've had your tomatoes in the same spot for say 10 years, your soil could just be incredibly healthy, or you're amending it beautifully at the end and start of each season. It could also be weather though, depending on if moisture is being held in the earth. You might want to get a ground cover as well. That can be a living ground cover, like a sweet alyssum to hold in the moisture, or it can be a straw to hold in the moisture as well. Garden Straw is a great brand. You can get it at Home Hardware. But yeah, there's definitely, I would recommend rotating for sure. It just really makes your soil structure a bit more powerful as you continue to rotate through. If you are going to change, maybe put like legumes, peas, beans in that spot this year. Something's going to feed the soil. And then just like chop them up in the ground and do that chop and drop at the end of the season, and then leave it till next year so it absorbs it. But yeah, it will depend. If you want to try it again this year, go for it, but make sure to really feed your soil before you're planting.
Oh, and Tia, is there problems with like wilt viruses or whatever they are being in the soil too? And
Definitely. Yeah. So
problem.
especially cucumbers, we had that as well. It's a soil fungus. And we have at the farm, we rotated our cucumbers this year because we had them in the ground in the same spot for 3 years. And it was just, we thought maybe it was the heat or airflow, but definitely there can be soil funguses that can be affected, or that can affect certain crops. So that's why biodiversity is so big. You don't want to have big monocrops of all tomatoes here, all this here. It's really important to sort of mix it up. I understand with space, it can be hard. So maybe it is feeding that soil with different microbes just to mix it up. Or if you're doing seasonal planting, put something different in the fall, something very different early spring, and then go for your tomatoes or anything, whatever you're growing.
And I'm just scanning here for more questions, but it looks like it's all just comments and thank yous from people. There's another one. Okay, so follow-up question from Beth. Is there a way to kill any fungus in the soil?
So it's really just about like building your healthy soil. Usually once there's a fungus present, it's sort of hard to get rid of it like for the next month. Usually you can change it by the time you come to your next spring season. If it's like, say you want to plant your tomatoes in it in May and you notice there is that soil fungus, without it being organic, there's a very difficult sort of stretch that you have to wait. So I would recommend just doing your rotation, only because you don't want to compromise your organic practices if you're able to move them. But throughout the season, I do recommend Other things like maybe a diatomaceous earth on your cucumber plants, um, changing your watering system. If you're doing overhead watering, maybe try a drip line system, which you can easily get just at any hardware store, and connect to your hose and let it drip, because it might be that overhead spray as well that's affecting it too.
And there's a question from Elise, which I can answer because it's more of a technical question. She's just wondering how to watch the first part of your talk, and we did post it on YouTube. So if you just go into YouTube and put in Grimsby Public Library, we have our own channel, and should be one of the things at the top or the start of that channel. So that's probably the easiest way to find it.
Yes,
Probably a
thank you.
Google search too. And just seeing if there's any other questions. Nothing yet. I might have asked you this question last year too, but I like to ask this of people who grow tomatoes. Just wonder if you have any favorite varieties for tomatoes.
Yes. So I specifically grow indeterminate tomatoes, both cherry and beefsteak tomatoes. And we are selling these seedlings at the farm too. So I really love the Frederick. They're nice, they're big, they're super juicy. They're not as acidic as, say, something like a New Girl, which is a bit smaller, more of the heart-shaped type, which is still delicious, but the Frederick is a bit more solid and it'll last a really long time once you bring it inside too. And it'll color beautifully if you harvest it while it's still turning, especially end of season. And then cherry tomatoes, Cherry Bomb is the best. And then the Sunrise Bumblebee, it's a red, yellow, orange stripe. It's very fantastic.
Yeah, I've tried that last one. I haven't tried Cherry Bomb or Frederick though, so I'll have to
They're
put
great.
those on my list. Yeah.
Yes. Did you want to say anything about the library's tomatoes?
Oh yes, thank you for the tip. Yeah, at the Grimsby Library after the May long weekend, we'll be giving away some heirloom tomatoes. We're growing 300 right now, so there's a good chance we'll be doing curbside pickup that week. So we'll probably have them out on a table, so you can stop by. The varieties we'll have will be black cherry, which one is one of my favorite heirlooms. We'll have some green giants. Some yellow currants, which are super tiny ones. They're kind of fun. We're trying one called White Queen this year. So anyways, just drop by
Beautiful.
the library after the long weekend.
Awesome. And if you do have a surplus of tomatoes for anyone growing seeds at home or anything like that, and I'm sure, as of course, the library knows too, there's a lot of community gardens around too. So if you end up with some extras, or you want to buy some or pick them up from the library to bring to these community gardens, everyone's definitely seeking out some, and you can just search community gardens in your area too to donate to.
Yeah, there's great ones in Beamsville and Smithville for the people in Grimsby. I don't think there's some traction to get one going in Grimsby. I think it'll happen one of
There's
these
a
days.
little one in Grimsby Beach, but it's not a big one, but we'll see.
Oh, okay,
Yeah,
okay,
it's very
that,
small.
that's good to know.
Yeah.
One other question here. How can you get rid of ants safely? My raised beds are next to a sandy driveway. Oh, and maybe this person is in Montreal. Montreal, because in brackets this is Montreal garden life. So, anyways, I assume the ants are coming from the sandy driveway.
Yeah, so for ants, they love to live in like dryness. So if your soil is dry, that's where they'll sort of begin to cultivate. So it's probably coming from your sand, because sand doesn't hold moisture for very long. So what I would say is, if you're able to, I'd plant again like a ground cover either along the edge of your bed or in the sand, something that needs drainage. Even lavender, it loves like a sandy soil. Anything from that's Mediterranean, like a sage or a thyme. But something like I said, the sweet alyssum would be fantastic, or a creeping thyme as well, something that you might not want to that is nice on the feet too. You can plant something like that to really hold in the moisture, and hopefully it'll deter the ants from setting up camp in any dry soil too.
Okay, thanks, Tia. So
Yeah.
we don't have any other questions, but yeah, I'll just check again. No other questions, but want to thank you again, and I know these garden talks have been well received the last 2 years, and it's you've really given us a lot of knowledge in a short time. So we really
Awesome.
appreciate that, and
Thank you.
just to wish everybody a good day, and I hope you can get out in the garden soon, and make some magic happen. So we'll say goodbye for now, and maybe see you around in the library before too long.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone.
Have a great day. Take care.